we are entering here into the end game. We have the hope that we can reach a deal, which will not be a bad deal because we will not sign a bad deal. And we hope that the deal that can be reached is an unambiguous, verifiable, and permanent deal that blocks the pathways of Iran to a nuclear bomb.
And that is the German ambassador to the United States, Peter Wittig, on the importance of not just a deal, but a good deal with Iran.
Meanwhile, Republicans writing a letter to Iran warning that a deal won't necessarily last.
Let's talk about the dynamics of that Senate letter and bring in my former congressional colleague, Michael Patrick Flanagan of Illinois. So, Mike, you have a situation where Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton gets, if memory serves, I believe 46 of his colleagues, and they send a letter to the Ayatollahs running Iran, essentially offering a civics lesson, saying, hey, look, whatever the president agrees to, it's still got to come through the Congress. And to paraphrase the intent of the letter, we don't trust you guys. I'm looking back to my history. I don't recall, you correct me if I'm wrong, has the Senate ever reached out unilaterally to a foreign government to school them in the American process?
I'm unaware of one, and I think the letter, frankly, would have been better sent to the White House to tell them, you know, the Iranians certainly would pay attention to it, that, you know, you need to come to us for advice and consent under the Constitution for this deal, and you just can't go ahead and run off on your own and think that it'll work. After the First World War, the Treaty of Versailles was not ratified because the Senate failed to come up with the right numbers, and they had some very strong feelings about the deal that Wilson had struck. But I don't think that they talked to the Germans directly. There were some senators that went along to the Hall of Mirrors, to the Treaty of Versailles, and they were probably in the room, but I don't, this kind of letter I think is very unusual.
Well, mindful of that, let's bring in Ali Safavi, the U.S. spokesman for the National Council of Resistance of Iran. And Ali, I would have to think from an Iranian perspective, you might welcome this letter from Republican senators. Is that the case?
Well, I think the point is really, despite all the wrangling about whether sending this letter was proper or not, I think the underlying issue here is the threat posed by a nuclear-capable Iran, and whether, in fact, the deal that is being negotiated right now will prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear bomb. And I think, in that respect, there has been bipartisan congressional support for pursuing a tough policy on the Iranian regime, not easing the sanctions. And I think their skepticism is well justified, just as you reported yourself yesterday that 72% of the American people are very skeptical about whether the current negotiations will result in preventing Iran from getting the bomb. So if anything can be said, is that members of Congress, who are the elected representatives of the American people, are basically voicing the same kind of concern that the American people are.
Well, Ali, you're referencing a poll that we were talking about. It's a new NBC poll, which basically said what you said. 71% of Americans don't think a nuclear deal with Iran will stop the country from producing a nuclear weapon. So I want to ask you, do you think this deal will even go through now?
Well, it remains to be seen. Of course, nobody knows what the details are. But be that as it may, I do not believe that the deal itself, even if it did go through, is sufficient enough, is strong enough to prevent Iran from getting the bomb. After all, there's no discussion whatsoever in the negotiations about past Iranian activities, their potential military aspects of their program. There's no, in a sense, no issue dealing with the unanswered questions that the IAEA has. And of course, unfortunately, IAEA has been pretty much sidelined by the P5+1. And of course, there's no serious mechanism of verification. If you recall, a couple of weeks ago, the NCRI revealed the existence of a secret nuclear site in the northeast suburbs of Tehran. Now, what happened to that? Is the administration going to pursue that? Is the IAEA going to pursue that? Remember, you're dealing with a regime that has a 3-decade history of denial, deception, and duplicity. Is this a trusting partner to negotiate with? So I think there are serious questions remain outstanding, and I think until and unless these questions are answered, I'm not at all too certain that even if a deal did go through, it would result in preventing Iran from getting the bomb.
Do you think it's possible that the administration wants a deal, any deal, more than a good deal? And that's a harder question, I think, than the simplicity which I gave it to you. Any deal would denote that they're more interested in the political aspects of having a deal here internally rather than internationally sending a signal that they're ready to deal with Iran in a very tough way.
Well, whatever the motivations of the administration, and of course they have to speak to that, I think the idea that somehow if you can strike a deal with the Iranian regime over the nuclear program, that all other problems that exist out there because of Iran's behavior will go away, I think is a misguided approach. Remember that history has shown, experience has shown, that the more concessions you give to this regime, you make it more brazen, more emboldened. Look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at Lebanon, look at Yemen. I mean, the Iranians right now are running the show in Iraq. Well, you know, there were 4,400 Americans killed in Iraq. Is this what they died and fought and died for? The United States has spent billions of dollars in Iraq. Was it for Iranians to have the supremacy in that country? I mean, the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force is now basically commanding the Iraqi forces.
And mindful of that, Ali, I want to return to, you've talked about this regime and its duplicity. A minute remains. We're talking about skepticism in the United States as judged by the latest public opinion polls. When it comes to the people running Iran, do they basically feel they've got a chance to run right over this administration and go straight to the nukes no matter all this talk about an international deal? 40 seconds, sir.
Well, clearly, I think what they have gotten from the administration is clearly a message of weakness. They see that their brazen human rights record in Iran is gone unnoticed. They have hanged 89 people in the past week alone, including 6 Kurdish dissidents. And as I said, their meddling in Iraq continues. So clearly for them, they have not gotten a signal that the United States is willing to stand up to their mischief behavior in Iran and around the region.
We will have to leave it right there. Ali Safavi, you have our thanks, and we'll be back after this update.